Hello, and welcome to this inaugural episode. This is a podcast where I wish to have conversations with ordinary, average Orthodox Christians who aren't necessarily authors or theologians or otherwise well known about their lives in the Orthodox Church, how they got here, and how it's shaped them. I'm a recent convert to Orthodoxy, and I'm curious to hear other people's stories. Even though this is the first episode, this is actually the second part of a conversation between myself and Jonathan Skeet, a recent Orthodox convert who lives in the Isle of Wight just off the southern coast of England. We happened to meet online and found we had a lot in common, including coming from an evangelical background and entering the Orthodox Church just a week apart. He reached out and asked if I'd be interested in talking about my journey into Orthodoxy. If you'd like to listen to that part of the interview, part one, you can click on the link down in the comments. So today is, as I said, part two, in which I return the favor by hearing his story of how he entered into the Orthodox Church and why. Feel free to leave any comments, and I hope you enjoy it. Well, hello, everyone. If you did not see our part one, this is actually part two of a conversation that Jonathan Skeet and my name is Ray Reek, are having about our journeys into Orthodoxy. In part one, Jonathan did a very nice job of acting as interviewer and allowing me to, walk through my journey into Holy Orthodoxy. And here for part two, I'm returning the favor. So hopefully, as I mentioned earlier, I won't be lowering the quality of the interview now that I'm returning the favor. So anyway, it was really good to get to know you a little bit better last time. And so hopefully we can continue to do that. So anyway, Jonathan, feel free to say a few opening words if you like.
Yeah, so I mentioned this to you earlier in the day on the messaging, where obviously the very sad, dark, and difficult backdrop to everything at the moment, especially for us in the Russian part of the Eastern Orthodox Church, is of course the terrible situation in Ukraine at the moment. I just felt I needed to say at the very start of things that obviously that's the sad backdrop at the moment. This is a very, very difficult time for us in our parish for all kinds of different reasons. But other than that, I don't really want to make too much comment about that, other than just to acknowledge that this is a really sad and difficult time for all concerned, but of course, mostly for the people in Ukraine. But just thought it should be mentioned at the start of our time together, really.
So, obviously you're not American. Your accent betrays that. I don't know if you're aware
Nobody's
of that.
perfect.
Right. Yeah, we Americans, we always think we're perfect. So, you live on the Isle of Wight, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Whereabouts is that located for
Okay.
those of us geographically challenged in the United States?
Okay, so if this is an oblong representation of the British Isles, then the Isle of Wight is just off the south coast here. It's the short ferry ride. You have to get on a ferry. The car ferry takes about 3/4 of an hour. The passenger ferry just about 15 or 20 minutes or so. So yeah, medium, smallish island just off the south coast of England. About, I don't know, about 25 miles wide and slightly less. It's kind of roughly in the shape of a diamond. And that's where we've been living since 2006, although I was born and brought up in Hampshire over on the British mainland. That's one of the counties on the south coast of England.
Very good. So how did you end up on the Isle of Wight?
Oh, that's a very long story. Just the 1 minute version is that when I was 25 years old, I very suddenly went to live in Germany to live in a Christian community. I lived in a Christian community there for 5 years as a full-time live-in member. Towards the end of that time, I met Natasha, a German lady, and we got married. I left the community and continued another 12 years, I think, on in Germany. And then we had huge problems because of home education. We were home educating our kids in Germany. We had massive problems with the school authorities. And so in the end, we decided to leave and came back to live here on the Isle of Wight. So close to my my Heimat, where I was born and brought up, but just across a little bit of water.
Oh, very good, very good. So, du sprichst viel Deutsch.
Nicht mehr so viel wie früher, leider. Not as much as earlier. It kind of, you come here and fresh from Germany, you speak German all the time, but over the years, inevitably it dwindles, and obviously I still speak a little bit of German from time to time, and I try and keep it fresh, listen to German-speaking radio stations, but unfortunately it does kind of fade away, very sadly, actually.
Mm. Yeah, well, my parents were both German immigrants. They had me when they were older, and so
Right.
my parents actually grew up in World War II.
Wow.
And my dad was a Luftwaffe pilot. My mom was a teenager
wow,
at the time, and so she lost some family members in the American bombings, but they escaped, came to the United States. So they spoke a lot of German at home. I learned a lot of German.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the German that I retained was a lot of the rather colorful German insults and ways of parenting that that German parents would use on children. And as I have gotten as my kids have gotten older, all of these phrases and colorful ways of making your kids behave have been flooding back. Like they just keep coming. It's very funny. So, but anyway, again, it's
wer nicht hören will, muss fühlen. Is that one of them?
Let's see. Is that when you don't hear, you feel it?
Yeah. If you're not prepared to listen, you've got to feel it, which is a precursor to a whack round the head or somewhere else.
Right. Well, there's one. I'm not even going to try German right now because I have to practice. But it is what's not in your head is in your feet.
Yeah.
Which is always a good one.
Muss man in die Beine haben.
Yeah, right. There you go. Yeah, you're still a little bit better than I am. Yeah, so there's been a lot of those. So I was, you had emailed me one time, and at the bottom of your email and your signature, you had your blog site. So I went, in preparation for this, I went trolling on your blog. And I noticed that you referred, your occupation is a independent funeral celebrant, and that was a term that I was not familiar with at all. Is that something that's common in England, and what exactly is that?
It's become common over the years. I don't know how long ago, but I guess probably up to, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago, the church or various churches, various bits of the church, you could say, had the monopoly on funeral services. It was unheard of that anyone other than a pastor, a priest, or minister would conduct a funeral service. But with the increasingly secularized society, a lot of people nowadays, even though they're not necessarily anti-God or anti-church, they've just grown up outside of any kind of church. It's not part of their experience. And so I conduct funeral services for such people who have chosen not to have a minister or a church-led funeral service. Although it's interesting that not nearly everybody, most of the people I do the services for still want to have what they describe as religious content. In other words, a hymn and the Lord's Prayer, at least, maybe. So, you still end up having some kind of Christian content in these services, but yeah, funeral services for anyone who doesn't want the church to do it, basically.
Interesting. Yeah, that's not something I'm aware of that has any like I've never heard of that here. So
No.
it's very possible that that occupation exists here in the United States, but it's not something that's well known. So that's
No,
very
no.
interesting. When I read that, I thought I need to ask Jonathan about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, have you ever encountered people that maybe asked you to officiate and perhaps include content that you were hesitant to include, like whether it's a religious tradition that's outside of yours that would have you doing things you weren't comfortable with? How would you handle that, or how have you handled that?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I made it a rule for me to never say anything in these services of my own volition that I personally didn't stand behind.
Okay.
So I never say anything at all about the afterlife, what my prognosis is. You know, I hear some celebrants saying, well, he or she is in a wonderful place of light and love and warmth now, and so on. That's beyond anything that I can know. So I decided not to include anything like that personally in my service. It's about saying goodbye to the person that we're doing the service for, an affectionate and respectful look back at his or her life and times, and saying goodbye to them, allowing space for grief. Well, I get asked to play some pretty wacky music sometimes, Ray. One that comes up fairly often is The Great Escape, the theme to the Great Escape film, and Firestarter by Prodigy. I don't know if you know that one. That comes up occasionally. But interestingly, Highway to Hell, that came up once as well at the end of a service. Go out with Highway to Hell, AC/DC. And that was a kind of a tough one for me. Ooh, Highway to Hell. But then again, it kind of occurred to me, well, a lot of people choose My Way by Frank Sinatra. I did it my way. And if you analyze the text of My Way by Frank Sinatra,
right.
I mean, Highway to Hell by AC/DC, it's not a piece of music that a Christian would really endorse, shall we say. However, you could say, well, it was never really intended to be taken seriously. I mean, it is perhaps serious. It was never intended to be taken seriously. It's a kind of a spoof send up of the macho rock and roll world. My Way, however, by Frank Sinatra is very serious. And if you want to compare kind of anti-Christian texts, I think personally, My Way comes in way higher than Highway to Hell by AC/DC, but that's just my opinion. But yeah, I get asked to play some weird and wonderful music sometimes.
That's very interesting. So is that your full-time occupation?
Yes. Yeah, that's what I do to keep us all going and keep food on the table. I mean,
now, does that take you all over England, or
no, that's just here on the Isle of Wight.
Really? Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to tell a short story, and then it's going to kind of lead into something that I'd like to hear from you. When we first moved to Pennsylvania, I mentioned this briefly last time. I sort of felt like a fish out of water. We moved up here for the kids and the wife to be closer to the family. And I remember, excuse me, I remember meeting with the pastor who officiated our wedding, because we got married in Pennsylvania when we were living in Kentucky. And I decided to have lunch with him just because I just needed some spiritual grounding and guidance. And I felt like I just didn't have anybody up here to talk to, and I really respected him. And so we had lunch together, and we probably talked for an hour and a half, and had a good conversation, of which I remember nothing, except at some point in the conversation, he says to me, Ray, maybe God took you out of your home to bring you home. And I looked at him and I asked him, I said, what do you mean by that? And he says, I have no idea. And so that was that, the conversation went on, and every so often that kind of popped up in my head, and I was thinking like, oh, that was just an odd statement. Just over the years. And it was odd that was the only thing that I remember from that whole conversation. then when I began looking into Orthodoxy, I'd listen to some podcasts or I'd read some books, and often priests would talk in their discussions with catechumens on air, or people who had just been received into the church. The priest would often say, "Welcome home." And so at some point, I put those two together and thought, you know what? He was not an Orthodox priest. He was a Church of God pastor, but I think it's very possible that God spoke through him and said, "I'm going to just put a little kernel into you that you're not going to realize until 10 years later, that God took me out of my home to bring me home." Because it's interesting that Pennsylvania has the largest number of Orthodox churches per capita in the United States. I mean, it's very much a hotbed. There are seminaries here, there are monasteries, and that's not true where I'm from. There are a handful of Orthodox churches, but you often have to drive a long way. So that was a long setup to say, what was your first experience with Orthodoxy, and what laid the seed, maybe even without your awareness, that bared fruit later on, or bore fruit rather?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure about. Well, I'll just describe the experience I had. So this was way back in the early to mid 90s when I joined the Christian community in Germany. This was a very kind of charismatic Protestant evangelical kind of multi-denominational community of people. We did a lot of street evangelism, and we used to organize lots of conferences. And I remember we went down to Bern in Switzerland for a John Wimber conference. So the idea was that we were going down as community members, not just to participate in the conference, but also to help out in various different teams. There was I think it was a vineyard church in Bern at that time who were organizing this. It's a big hall, and I met John Wimber himself. That's a funny story that I'll tell you about some other time. And as part of the week that we were there, we actually did a little bit of a kind of a street evangelism together with, it was another small local fellowship who, as I recall, were largely composed of folk from Africa, who I think there were asylum seekers and people like that. And we did the street evangelism together with them. But it was all under the umbrella of the Basilia Gemeinde, Basilia Church in Bern. And I remember while we were doing this street evangelism, being aware of someone who I would now instantly recognize as an Orthodox monk or Orthodox priest, but back then, a strange-looking man with long hair and beard in long black robe, standing on the periphery, and he kind of looked at us for quite a while. And then he walked over to me after a while and said, "Oh, hello," in German, but with some kind of an accent, not a Swiss accent. And then at some point in the conversation, he said, "Well, do you know what Basilia means?" And I kind of rather embarrassedly confessed that I didn't actually know. And then he said, "Das heißt Reich. Reich heißt das." It means kingdom. Kingdom it means, in kind of Yoda-like fashion. And then he just looked at me and then just walked off slowly. So it was a kind of a strange encounter, really, in a way. But he'd obviously made this direct line over to me amongst all of these other people, engaged me in conversation, and then said that and then walked off. I've often wondered since then, maybe, who knows, maybe he prayed as he walked off that obviously confused young man would find his way into the church one day. I don't know, but if he did, well, it worked. So here we are.
I really like that story, and obviously there can be a lot of speculation on your part as to what may he have seen or why he chose to come and interact with you. That's, that perhaps one day in the next life you might run into him again. But
exactly.
I've noticed that Orthodoxy has has a tendency at times to be mysterious, and it's like that, the saints and certain priests and certain interactions, like they have to go take a class like how to be mysterious and
enigmatic.
So, yes, very enigmatic. And so was that something you just filed away, or did you think about that, or did it really just kind of pop up again once you started looking into Orthodoxy?
Well, I'd filed it away. I'd always remembered that encounter, and looking back, I kind of wished retrospectively that I'd engaged him a bit more in conversation. Tell me about yourself. Well, you're obviously some kind of a priest, but I was a bit flummoxed at the time. I didn't quite know how to respond. I thought, because I had the feeling that although he was kind of friendly in a sober kind of a way, I had the feeling that he probably wasn't hugely impressed with with what we were doing,
Right.
So it kind of felt slightly awkward, really. But it came up particularly recently through approaching and then joining the church. Oh yeah, that bloke in Bern. Yeah, I guess he's still around. He wasn't very old back then. He was a relatively young priest or monk then, so he's probably still around somewhere.
That's very interesting. It is interesting to look back into our journeys in the church and just sort of see in context some of the different influences that brought us there. So when you grew up as a Baptist, is that correct?
No, I was born and brought up in the Brethren assemblies.
Oh, right.
Is the Brethren, the Plymouth Brethren, something in the States as well?
Yes, it's actually, there's a heavy Brethren contingency here in Pennsylvania, actually.
Okay.
Some of my family were and are Brethren. Or they used to be Brethren, and they've diverged into other, evangelical churches. But the Brethren is a very strong presence here.
So is what we call the open brethren, or what I call the sensible brethren, as opposed to the kind of exclusives, like the hyper strict exclusives. So it was really and truly about as far away from orthodoxy on the expression of organized Christianity as you can find, really. For those of you who don't know, Brethren assemblies, very, very simple buildings, unadorned buildings, an instinctive mistrust of clergy, liturgy, anything like that. That the Sunday morning services, what they call the breaking of bread services, were unstructured, as in no prior plan to the service at all. We just arrive, I don't know what time, 10:30 or something, and we just sit down quietly. And the idea is the Spirit moves. One of the men stands up and reads a short Bible passage, or says a prayer, or requests a hymn, and that's how the service proceeds. And then culminating in the Lord's Supper. Obviously, it's only symbolic. These are just symbols, memory jogs, visual aids of the death of Jesus for us. Having said that, though, actually, I would say other than well, it's a funny thing, because on the one hand, that very, very pragmatic, and you could say perhaps rather superficial way of looking at the body and blood is just symbolic. Having said that, the level of reverence and also a certain sense of mystery about approaching the time of communion actually was similar, or felt similar in a way, looking back to that level of reverence, mystery, and holiness as we approach the Eucharist in Orthodoxy. And the only bit of decoration in the chapel was at the front. There was a kind of just a raised platform thing at the front with a kind of decorated balustrade thing and a lectern in the middle, because the preaching of the word is the central point. But in an ark over the back of the church, the chapel, in old-fashioned kind of handwriting, was painted in gold letters, I think from the Psalms somewhere, "Oh, worship the Lord in the spirit of holiness." "Oh, worship the Lord in the spirit of holiness." And that's also been something that's come back to me as I've approached and joined the church, that joining the church is, for me, the fulfillment of probably the first Bible verse I ever read in my life as a very young lad, just sitting there, just learning the ABC bit by bit, and probably the first bit of the Bible I ever read. And so, yeah, "Oh, worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness." That's a really good description of orthodoxy, I think, really. But yeah, I've had various, just very briefly. So I left the Brethren assemblies when I was about 14 or 15. Spent a little bit of time in the Anglican Church because my father became ordained in the Anglican Church. And then since then, just various church experiences, quite large chunks in a couple of Baptist churches. It was a Baptist church in England that sent me out to the community in Germany. And then the last 6 years have been spent in a Baptist church just around the corner here as well. Always very happy to see the folk from there again out on the street. Or I pop in sometimes to pick my daughter up from the youth group that she goes along to. And in between times, I've also had experiences at a Pentecostal church, and 5 very formative years at the, I would say, hyper charismatic fellowship that I was part of. So all really mainly fair and square in the Protestant evangelical world, really.
But you sort of have run the gamut of, you go from the Brethren, to the Baptist, to the Charismatic. You gave them all a try.
Yes.
It is. I find it fascinating. Like, there are certain things that our journeys very much parallel. I grew up in sort of a non-denominational or Wesleyan tradition. We would attend alternately churches that sort of, a lot of the same people were involved, but sometimes they were in the Wesleyan denomination. Sometimes they would go start their own church, and it was very fluid. But the Wesleyan church that I grew up in when I was very young, it also had a sort of a placard over the back wall of the behind the lectern, the sacred desk, as our pastor always called it, "Holiness unto the Lord." And I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Wesleyan tradition that arose out of the Pilgrim Holiness movement, and before that, the Methodist movement with John Wesley. From what I understand, John Wesley actually had quite an affinity for the Church Fathers. And so as I look back through my orthodoxizing eyes, I wouldn't say orthodox eyes yet, they're still being reformed. I can see this. I can see those bits in John Wesley and in the Wesleyan Church, the idea of holiness and being changed in order to live holy, something that was a good thing that was imparted unto me. I ultimately think that, as I did in all of the traditions that I was a part of, that eventually there was an unbalance there. It would often degenerate into performance-based religion. It could often degenerate into hyper-judgmentalism. It could often degenerate into people giving up because they didn't feel they could ever measure up. So that's one thing that and obviously there can be excesses everywhere, even in the true church, but as a whole, the Orthodox teaching and tradition and history just provides that balance that all those different traditions would have in part. I often likened it to, you take a baseball or something and you throw it through a pane of glass and the shards shatter. And so, this shard became the Wesleyan Church, and this shard became the Pentecostal movement. And all these different movements are trying to get back to something that the tradition they came from lost, and it seems to be this meandering around in sort of a real desire to find the whole true unified faith, and well, just become more.
I mean, yes, in a sense, theosis is only a strange concept because of the name theosis. The name sounds like something you do in a laboratory. So today we're going to observe the effect of theosis on 3 separate tissue samples, something like that. But I mean, I'd often thought, actually, now I've got to be very careful here because people might pick me up and say, no, you're not describing theosis correctly at all. You're completely way off beam here. But I'd often thought in the past, you would read passages like Romans chapter 8, which go on and on and on about the life of Christ. The spirit of him who raised Christ from the dead lives in you. So it's you can sometimes have the idea of Jesus as a mentor. He's kind of standing some way off and you just kind of watch what he does and you try and copy him dutifully. Well, what would Jesus do? Well, I think maybe he'd do this, which maybe has its place. You can just look at the record of Jesus, how he acted, the things he said and the things he did. But I often wondered, or I often thought to myself, it's an incredible thing, really. It's an amazing thing that it's not just a mentor relationship. It's actually, or should be, the actual life of Christ forming itself inside me somehow through some mysterious means. And I'd often thought that we didn't really make enough of that somehow in the various churches that I was involved with. It tended to be, watch what Jesus does, try and copy him, try and emulate his example. But we didn't really talk about what seemed to me the very mysterious concept of, it's not just that, it's his life, or it's himself somehow or other living his life in my life. And why don't we talk about that enough? As I say, someone might pick me up and say, well, no, theosis is something a bit different to that. I don't know, but that's how it seems to me as well. It's this kind of our separateness becoming infused with one another and becoming God is the kind of controversial sounding phrase that's used, isn't it? Becoming God, becoming through grace what God is by nature.
Right.
So again, that didn't seem to be such a strange or foreign concept to me in the Orthodox Church, except that there are ways and means. We have ways and means. Sorry, there are structures, disciplines, graces, means, all laid out for us to be able to practically, day by day, week by week, embark on that actual journey. In the previous churches that I've been involved with, it wasn't really very clearly laid out. This is how you can embark on this journey of what we now call theosis. And in fact, I remember a long time ago in, I think, my late teenage years, I'd kind of drifted a bit spiritually. I'd gone off the wrong way a little bit. And I was very, very keen to come back to God and to properly come back to God. I want to live my life for God. I want to be a really good Christian. I want to know that he's there day by day. And I asked people about this. I said, look, I feel like God's drawing me. He wants me to, I want to live a really good Christian life. What do I have to do? And people would say things like, well, the fact that you're asking, what do I have to do, kind of shows that you don't really understand grace properly. You don't have to do anything. It's all just grace, and God helps you. And you saying, what do I have to do, kind of shows that you're kind of thinking that it's dependent on you and what you do, etc., etc. And it was all well intended, they loved me and I loved them. But
Right.
looking back, it would have been so much more helpful, really, if they'd said something along the lines of, right, okay, well, it's all grace, of course. It's through what Jesus did for us that anything is possible at all. Having said that, you might want to try this and this and this. Try those two things first and see how you get on. And that for me is a big difference with Orthodoxy, that we're not at all shy about giving people stuff to get on with.
Right. Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
This will help. I remember in my very initial approach to Orthodoxy as an inquirer, I got into quite a state about it. There was a kind of a resistance there, and I would get into quite a negative emotional state about it. I would get very despondent. I would think this is just a fantasy, a dream. Me joining this incredible church? No. And I got quite down about it, to the extent that I contacted Father Joseph, the priest who's been incredibly helpful and kind in accompanying myself and Natasha into the church, helping us in. And I described this to him. And he didn't say anything along the lines of, well, just let go and let God or anything like that. He said, right, okay, well, you won't know about this, obviously, but we're in the kind of Great Lent season, I think it was back then, or we've just come through here's the prayer of St. Ephraim. He sent it through to me on the email, try this. And it felt for all the world like the doctor giving me a prescription. So,
Yeah.
oh, right, okay, well, take this 3 times a day until symptoms clear up. Not afraid just to give me something concrete to do. And it did help. It was a blessing saying that, repeating that prayer day by day. But in the various other churches I've been in, there's a very great shyness or fear of having to do stuff, if you see what I mean, of having to do things to enable the spiritual life, which at the end of the day, after a very long and convoluted discussions, people admit, well, of course, yeah, you do actually have to do things, really. But
right. I mean, you don't just lie back and
no,
be transformed by this light. I in my Wesleyan church, there was a real danger at times of emotion. I don't know if you saw this in your Pentecostal churches or not. Like, I want to be very respectful, because like there was many people in my Wesleyan church that influenced me greatly in positive ways, and I have the utmost respect in their utter devotion to Christ. But there was a danger at times of mistaking emotionalism for connection with the Spirit. And so there would be this, if I feel the emotion, then I'm connected with the Spirit, and that's all being done to me. And then at other times, there would be this, well, if you don't get up at 6 a.m. in the morning and read the Bible for at least half an hour, and if you don't pray, an hour every morning, then you're not really doing what you should be doing. And so there was this real tension between always feeling and always doing, coupled with the idea that if you did anything wrong, your salvation was over and you basically had to almost be resaved. Like everything was very precarious in my mind.
But going back to what you said about emotionalism, when I was at college, I once found myself in a little Pentecostal church that was really, really on, Pentecostalism on steroids. And I remember about halfway through the service, all of a sudden, everybody, the entire congregation, was dancing around the room in this long conga line. Everyone had their hands on the kind of waist of the person in front of them. There was a band at the front playing, and everyone was snaking around the entire room. And it was just me sitting on a chair in the middle of the room by myself. And I thought to myself, well, I don't know. I feel more foolish sitting on this chair than I would do joining in the conga. So I got up and joined on the tail end of the conga and went around the room. And obviously they all thought, oh, hallelujah, praise God. You know, he's experienced a breakthrough. Hallelujah, Jonathan. Whoa. And but it's just been an odd pathway through you know, it sounds like I've been church hopping with all of these different churches, but this was over a fairly long time period. Of course, I always went to churches at least for a few years before life and circumstances led me on somewhere else.
So what exposure did you have that first got you interested in Orthodoxy specifically? And then maybe what led you up to thinking like, okay, there's something more, there's something I'm missing, or maybe you didn't feel that, and maybe Orthodoxy just sort of stopped you in the middle of the road, kind of like the angel of Lord with what is it? The guy that rode the donkey in the Old Testament.
Balaam.
Yes,
Was it?
Balaam, yeah. Balaam. Maybe he just stood in the middle of the road and the donkey spoke to you and said, stop. There's some angel of the Lord.
No, well, I mean, again, this is quite a long story. This goes back quite a long way, actually. I would say that for various reasons, going back over the last 10 years or so, my spiritual life generally had been gradually fading away. I had one not very good experience at an Anglican church. I won't go into all of that because people know me here and they could put two and two together and so on. But I just had one rather unfortunate experience with a certain vicar at a certain Anglican church that I went to, of kind of rather dominating and manipulative behavior, which got me down more than I should have let it get me down. And in combination with that, I suppose I've always tended to be somewhat of a cerebral kind of a person, and I really wasn't praying very much at all personally. My wife and I, we'd have a short prayer time in the morning. Other than that, I wasn't praying very much. And they say that when someone loses their faith, usually the first thing they start doing is not pray anymore. In addition to that, again, I don't want to sound at all snobbish or unkind. I was just starting to find the evangelical world, how can I put it? I don't know whether it's become a bit more superficial over the years. I really don't know, but I began to find it lacking. I had developed a love also for liturgy, for liturgical worship through my time in the Anglican Church. And also my parents-in-law, Natasha's parents in Germany, my father-in-law is a lover of liturgy as well. He's a retired Lutheran pastor in Germany. And he had quite a lot of contact with Orthodoxy as well over the years. He went on trips over to Russia and East Bloc countries and met quite a number of priests and monks there. And he would often come back from these journeys raving about the Orthodox services, how wonderful they were, and so on.
Really?
But yeah, my spiritual life was fading away actually, and in the end I thought, I've got to do something. If I don't do anything, in a year's time I'll be a non-believer. I'll kind of step over that line and I'll be saying, well, I'm not really a Christian anymore. And what will I be then? How do you reinvent yourself? Can I reinvent myself? What other meaning and purpose would I find? And in the end, one evening I got out of my bed at about, 2 o'clock in the morning. I went into the room next door. I got down on my knees and I prayed a very short prayer. It was, oh God, I feel like I'm drifting off into outer darkness. Please help me. Amen. And that was that. I went back to bed. A few weeks after that, I had the impulse, this was now during COVID, I think, had the impulse to start saying the morning prayers in the Anglican liturgy. I could Book of Common Prayer, go through the morning prayers together with Natasha every morning. So without realizing it, I was getting a prayer rule going, or the beginnings of a prayer rule, what the Orthodox Church calls a prayer rule. That already started to open up little doors, shall we say, or kind of open things up again a little bit. And I began to be aware that there is a world of faith, there is a world of communion with God day by day. At the same time, now this is a very, very strange thing, because I've heard this from a number of people, quite a lot of people. It's the very odd and unexpected Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pajot route to orthodoxy. Very, very odd, because Jordan Peterson, I don't want to say whether he's a Christian or not. That's beyond my ken. I don't want to embarrass myself by giving prognostications about that. But at any rate, you know about Jordan Peterson. You know also about his conversations with Jonathan Pajot. That got me onto Jonathan Pajot's channel. And if you start watching Jonathan Pajot, then YouTube, for once in my life, the YouTube algorithm, working to wonderful effect, started putting these things into my feed, like Father Josiah Trenham, Father Stephen Freeman, various other monks. You mentioned the Mull Monastery, the guy in Mull whose name I've forgotten, unfortunately.
Father Seraphim.
Yeah, and various other people. And it began to strike me, two things began to strike me. The first was seeing videos of Divine Liturgy, and I would watch these videos of these incredible buildings with these icons everywhere, and the music and mysterious ritual going on. Had no concept of what it was all about, but it just seemed amazing and wonderful. And we're missing something. We're missing something in our evangelical churches. And then in parallel to that, watching videos by people like Father Stephen Freeman, all these various other monks with their channels, talking about the day-to-day spiritual life in Orthodoxy. As I mentioned earlier, that the various graces, blessings, disciplines, asceticism, all of it there to help us grow in Christ-likeness, or becoming through grace what God is by nature, and so on. And I thought, well, that's an amazing combination. There's the beauty there, there's the tradition, and a sense of it's not just one particular person with his thoughts and his feelings about things that's at the center of everything. There's something much, much bigger that goes way beyond the person who's at the front of the church doing stuff, whatever it is, combined with what seemed to me gradually building up a picture of a daily Orthodox Christian life. And I thought, well, I think this is probably it, actually. And then the first actual concrete step was contacting Father Joseph. Well, I just Googled, is there an Orthodox parish anywhere here near? There certainly isn't one on the Isle of Wight, but discovered in Portsmouth and Southampton, two fairly large cities, fairly close to each other on the south coast of England, just across the other side of the water there are. And then I just contacted Father Joseph. This was in March of last year. So, I'm becoming more interested in Orthodoxy. Could I come along and visit your parish sometime? Yes, of course you can. You'd be most welcome. And that led on to Father Joseph's Friday evening introduction to Orthodoxy sessions, what I call Orthodoxy for Dummies. Joined in with those sessions together with my wife. Over 12 weeks, the sessions went on for very basic foundations in the Bible and the plan of salvation, kind of things that you're familiar with, really, from an evangelical background, but then diverging into the life of the church, baptism, burial, marriage, the daily Orthodox life, fasting, prayer, all of those things covered over 12 weeks. And after that time, it's decision time, of course. Do you take the next step? And my original plan had been to spend the whole of the summer praying, thinking, considering. But really, by the time we'd done the 12 sessions, I thought, well, okay, so there's a very great deal I don't know about Orthodoxy. I'm an absolute beginner, but I feel like I know enough now to signal commitment to wanting to become a catechumen. And so again, I signaled that to Father Joseph, and my wife and I were welcomed as catechumens in kind of midsummer, I think, last year. And then we were both welcomed into the church towards the end of November. And so that's how it all came about. Again, as I say, the very, very odd Peterson Pajot route. And I've met so many people who have followed along that route.
Yeah.
Very strange. Who could have thought of something like that?
Yeah. So you mentioned that you and your wife entered into the catechumenate, and she sort of went along with the 12, almost a 12-step program, the 12-week program. So what was her reaction, and how did you break it to her to say, like, I've kind of been watching these Orthodox videos and kind of been doing deep dives on Jonathan Pajot's YouTube channel, and did she, I guess, two things. One, was she supportive of that? And two, did she notice anything change in you during that time? And how did she react to all that? And what made her say, like, yeah, I'm going to go along with you on that?
Well, I mean, this is her fault, really. I mean, she's been praying for me for a long time, but you see, she prayed the wrong prayer. So she's been praying for years and years and years. Oh Lord, please bless and help my dear husband Jonathan. I can see him fading away spiritually. Please draw alongside him and help him. She forgot to add the clause to that, in as minimally a disruptive way as possible, please.
Right.
And so I would say initially, because I was rather concerned about this, because I thought, well, if I simply announced to her, my dear, I'm becoming Orthodox, she would go with me. She would just come with me. Well, of course, I'll become Orthodox as well. But it was very important to me that she would want to, that it would be from her heart, and that would be something that she would really be finding a yes to herself. However, she really loved, I mean, we both really loved the sessions with Father Joseph on Friday evenings. We'd always really look forward to them. And I would say our first attendance at Divine Liturgy was, some people are absolutely blown away by their first experience of Divine Liturgy. My experience was mixed. I mean, obviously, you don't really quite know what's going on. I remember hearing once a very disparaging, I think it might have been John MacArthur. Someone dragged him along to Divine Liturgy. You know John MacArthur, of course, do you?
In Russia, I think it was. I think I heard him talk about this.
Right, okay.
He was in a Russian service.
Okay. And he described it as chanting, and then some more chanting, and then some walking, and then some more chanting. Very.
They didn't even have any tracks laid out.
No. And if you don't know what's happening, if you don't know what the various parts of the liturgy are, and also if some of it is in Russian as well, or Slavonic, Church Slavonic.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's about 70% English, 30% Church Slavonic.
Right.
It was quite a marathon initially, the first service. And yet this odd feeling of, I want to come back here, I want to be a part of this. And this is right, this is where I should be. But yeah, it was a question about my wife, wasn't it? I think, actually. So yeah, we as we both came into it, to the sessions on Friday evenings, attending Divine Liturgy, getting to know people in the parish, she became very, very keen as well. And in fact, I asked her a few months ago. I said to her, I think we were making our way back from Divine Liturgy back to the island, and we were sitting waiting for the ferry. And I said to her, look, if you could go back in time and have two choices, choice number one is we stayed in the Baptist church, but somehow or other, I managed to get my spiritual life back on track, and I was living a great life for the Lord, and everything was wonderful and so on. Or the way we've gone now, becoming Orthodox, which would you choose? And without hesitation, becoming Orthodox, absolutely, definitely. Which was has been a tremendous reassurance to me, because it must be tricky. It must be difficult if there's a marriage partner who has reservations or doesn't. I mean, I've heard stories. You had a little bit of an in-between phase that you described in your last video, but no, very, very happy that Natasha and I are both in it together. Something else quite amusing happened a few months ago one morning, because Father Joseph knows that we both sing in choirs here on the Isle of Wight. And about halfway through Divine Liturgy a few months ago, Father Joseph suddenly stopped what he was doing. He walked across the room up to us and said, just come with me for a moment, would you please? Oh, okay. We walked
in the middle of the
him.
liturgy.
Yeah. He said, just stand there, please. Oh, okay. So we stood there, and then he walked off and carried on. And for about 5 minutes, I thought, what was that about? What's special about standing here? And I looked to my right and I saw a row of music stands, and it's the choir. Okay. And I leaned across to Natasha and whispered in her ear, I think we just joined the choir.
That's fantastic.
Although initially you're just listening, you're kind of just listening and kind of picking things up as you go along. So no, Natasha's been really, I mean, at the very beginning, she couldn't quite see how it would work. You know, that there aren't any Orthodox parishes here on the Isle of Wight. We're really going to drag ourselves across the Solent every Sunday to go to church. It seems a bit ridiculous. And I suppose that's the only fly in the ointment, really, is the traveling on a Sunday. But
that could be her memoirs about journeying into Orthodoxy, called "Dragged Across the Solent."
Yeah. Dragged across the water. Yeah. So yeah, we're both very much on board with it, and that is an enormous blessing, of course.
Now, did as you were going through the 12-week course, maybe as you were a catechumenate, obviously there's a lot of theological nuance or differences in view with general evangelical perspective. Did you come across any doctrinal or theological or church issues that gave you pause? Like, a lot of people coming from an evangelical perspective, they have a really hard time sort of getting over the hurdle of venerating the Theotokos, Virgin Mary. They may have an issue, we've come from a Calvinist background, with the idea of a synergistic view of salvation in which we cooperate with God's grace rather than we're sort of a dead vessel and he does everything. And then sort of in relation to that, were there any doctrines that you really had a hard time letting go of? Like, like this is a huge change. For me, it was sola scriptura. I felt like I was doing something wrong, like, because the Bible, and jettisoning that view was something that emotionally took me much longer than intellectually changing that view.
Well, surprisingly, very, very little difficulty or resistance. I mean, I'd had problems in the past when I was more settled into my evangelicalism. I'd had conversations with Roman Catholics, for example, in the past about Mary, and absolutely convinced of my own correctness and probably fairly cocky and arrogant about it as well, to my shame. I remember years ago I had quite a set to with an Orthodox lady, actually, on some discussion forum, when we're talking about the Bible, and she said, well, we don't go in for private Bible interpretation. You know, we follow the church fathers and the way they laid things out and saw things. That's what we stick to. And that seemed outrageous to me, you know, because well, one of the things at the heart of Protestant evangelicalism is I read the Bible, and you know, it's me and God and me and the Holy Spirit, and I read the Bible and interpret it myself, and or can do, and so on and so forth. But in this phase of actually approaching the church years later, now it sounds a bit. It sounds a bit, you know, someone watching this who's not a part of the church might now hear alarm bells going off when I say that I just didn't care anymore. You know, it's a bit like, if you can imagine really falling in love with somebody. So you're a guy, imagine you fall in love with a woman, and you're absolutely head over heels in love with her. And then she says, but I'm this, I don't care, I love you. Yeah, and I'm also this and this and this. Doesn't matter. I want to be together with you. Yeah, but have you thought about this and this and this? Yeah, that's okay. That's all okay. I kind of thought to myself, I could probably spend the rest of my life trying to figure out whether this is all correct according to what I've previously thought or believed. It would be quite torturous progress. In the end, I just threw myself completely open and if you like, swallowed it whole. And I suppose also I'd been becoming a little bit orthodox anyway beforehand, without even realizing certain ways of looking at things, the spiritual life, the aspects of salvation, you know, salvation not just being a change in our legal status before God. I'd already started to have thoughts along those lines beforehand. And so when it came to it, I didn't really struggle with anything much. I mean, I struggled a bit with a certain awkwardness, which, you know, I still don't think I feel completely relaxed when we're going to Divine Liturgy and I'm about to enter the building. I still have that sense of mind your P's and Q's, you know, do it correctly. Don't be foolish or what's the word, superficial about things. And it still feels outwardly slightly awkward approaching and venerating the icons. It's something I love to do. I can't imagine now having a prayer time at home, for example, without icons in front of me. Obviously you can pray without icons. You can go walking around outside, pray while you're driving a car and so on. But the thought of sitting down for an actual dedicated prayer time without my icons there seems already like a foreign concept, something you just wouldn't do. So yeah, still a slight sense of awkwardness, still finding my way with the Divine Liturgy, still a slight awkwardness with confession. I
think that's kind of baked into that process, though, right?
Yes,
I think.
yes. But I had very, very little resistance, really. You know, it's like, you know, if you can imagine you're nearly drowning and you're being pulled out of the water, not just being rescued, but rescued by this incredible, wonderful, beautiful person. You know, what resistance would you really have? You know, as I say, people listening to this might think, oh my goodness me, you know, test all things, test the spirits to see if they are from God, and so on and so forth. But I just had this strong feeling I can walk across here. The ice holds, if you see what I mean. It's not going to collapse on me, and also that very, very odd feeling of coming home. I can really testify to that, although it makes zero sense, because this is a completely foreign church culture, a completely foreign national culture as well. Russian Orthodox Church. Not spent much time with Russians in the past. I've driven through Russia once, actually. That's another story. Everything about it is foreign, and yet this sense of, yeah, this is where I belong. This is where I should be. I don't want to be anywhere else.
Well, I do want to be respectful of your time. We've been at this for almost an hour and a half. So
Oh yes,
time is
my word.
time has gone very quickly. But just sort of here in the end, just to wrap up our conversation, a friend once told me that once you are on the road to orthodoxy, to be on the lookout for some strange coincidences or things that make you go or like you recounted that story when you were in Bern, the Orthodox priest coming up to you, and I recall this conversation I had with a Church of God pastor who somehow in my mind, whether psychologically or spiritually, got linked with my journey toward the church. I've also heard that, when people are looking to enter the church and they are looking to figure out who their patron saint will be, that, the patron saint chooses you in some cases rather than you choosing the saint. Did you ever find that to be the case? First of all, who's your patron saint, and did anything like that happen to you as you came into the church? Like for instance, I happened to give my first confession, my life confession, on the day of my name day, even before I was chrismated. And it just happened to fall that that Saint Theodore the Studite was commemorated on the very day that I gave my first confession. Also, the Saint Theodore the Studite, his brother, Saint Joseph, his name day is July 14th, which happens to be my birthday. Just odd little coincidences that you can look at and say, well, that means nothing, but I don't know, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't.
Have you heard, do you know is the singer John Anderson popular in the States? John Anderson used to sing in the band Yes back in the 1970s.
Yes is fairly well known by people my age and older.
And then there was John Vangelis in the 80s.
Yes, Chariots of Fire theme. And
do you remember that that song that John and Vangelis brought out, that some is Find My Way Home, Someday I'll Find My Way Home?
Was that John Anderson or John Vangelis?
That was John Anderson with Vangelis.
Oh, with Vangelis. I didn't realize Vangelis.
John Anderson singing.
Yes.
As it happens, I play the drums in a band with somebody who is a close relative of John Anderson. And then this was a funny little thing in the very beginning phases when I was really worrying about this and wondering about this. Someone requested for a funeral that song, Someday I'll Find My Way Home, by John Anderson, John and Vangelis. And I listened to that, and there's a line in there that goes, my sun shall rise in the east, so shall my heart be at peace. I thought, oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. But the really funny thing that happened, kind of semi-humorous, I would say, but something that happened in the very early stages. At the very beginning, I went through a period of quite strong resistance. It wasn't a kind of an intellectual resistance. No, I can't accept the veneration of the saints. I can't accept the thing with Mary. It wasn't that kind of a resistance. It was a more amorphous or ill-defined inner resistance. I'd wake up in the morning and think, just contact that Father Joseph, contact him, send him an email and say, thank you very much. It's been very interesting, but it's not for me. Thank you very much. Run away, get away. And I got in quite a state about it. I had purchased at that time a prayer rope. I'd actually started praying the Jesus prayer using a prayer rope. And I got into a state one day to the degree that I wanted to get rid of everything. It's really shocking to look back and describe it now, but I was going to throw the prayer rope in the garbage. I was going to throw it in the rubbish bin to kind of separate myself from it all. I think probably because you sense there's this big claim on you. If you join the Orthodox Church, it's not like just going to the church around the corner because you like it better. It's like a claim on the whole of your life, really.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, no, I better not throw the prayer rope in the rubbish bin. Really, I had sufficient self-restraint to not do that. But instead, I hung it around the neck of a lamp that I've got attached to my desk here. And then I just went off and did something else. In the middle of the night, when I was fast asleep, the entire room lit up with this amazing light. Thought, oh my goodness me, what's going on here? Kind of got out of bed blinking and tousled, and what's going on? And the lamp on my desk had switched itself on. It doesn't have a timer to switch itself on. It had just bing, switched itself on. I thought, oh, that's odd. And I didn't really think anything about it. So I just switched it off again. An hour later, exactly the same thing happened. The room was lit up with this really bright light. It seemed to me that it was brighter than the lamp actually is, although that might just have been my kind of night vision. And again, I got out of bed and switched the lamp off. And it was only when I got up in the morning, I saw the prayer rope hanging round the neck of the lamp. And I thought, okay, you know, the kind of skeptical rationalist part of me says, well, you know, just a coincidence, just the electricity doing strange things, although it's never ever done that before, never done it since. In the end, I thought, well, coincidence or not, I'll just take that as a, you know, wake up sleeper, rise from the dead, and let the light of Christ shine on you. Always taken it to have that meaning anyway, which is a kind of an odd thing, really. Yeah, so that was that. I suppose there've been other little kind of confirmations along the way, but I can't really think of any. But for me, really, just the main thing is just that overwhelming sensation of, this is it. This is where I belong. This is where I don't want to be anywhere else.
Well, I think that little anecdote is a wonderful way to sort of wrap up our conversation.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and hopefully one day our paths will cross, not just online, but in actuality, in an incarnational fashion.
Yeah.
I look forward to doing something again, maybe in a few months or a year, whenever it might be appropriate. We can touch base and compare notes and how things are going. We were chrismated within a week. I think I entered the church a week before you.
Yes.
And so we're sort of on this very same track. In other words, you on that side of the ocean and me on this side of the ocean. But yeah, I definitely want to keep in touch. So
and we've got a Protestant to Orthodox Facebook group as well, if anyone's interested.
Yes. Yeah. Why don't you just give a brief synopsis of that? And
so there's a Facebook group. I mean, Facebook is it's a tiresome thing in a way, Facebook, and in some ways I wish I didn't have anything to do with it. But I did start up a Facebook group recently with the title Protestant to Orthodox, and there are lots and lots and lots of Facebook groups and pages to do with Orthodoxy, but I didn't find anything much specifically to do with the journey from Protestantism to Orthodoxy. So I set that up. That's in its very beginning stages. If anyone's interested, joining in the group, joining in the discussion. If you join the group, it doesn't mean that you're definitely going to join the church. We won't see it that way. It's a very free and easy group. But yeah, if you're interested, drop by and join in the discussion, basically.
All right, very good. So best of luck to you, and I would appreciate your prayers as I journey into this first Lent, and I will do the same for you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Hope it is a time of renewal and getting our toes wet in something that us former Protestants are not really used to. So
yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon.
You're welcome, Ray. Yeah. God bless.